Let your mind drift like a small boat upon still waters. Far away across the veil of time, a ship begins to move. It is the evening of April 10th, 1912. The harbour of Southampton hums softly in the dusk. A faint mist hangs above the water, and lanterns shimmer like stars caught between the sea and sky. At the dock, the RMS Titanic waits, vast, silent, and radiant beneath the fading light. People gather along the pier, waving their handkerchiefs, their voices fading into the sound of gulls. Some are laughing, some are crying. Others simply stand still, as if watching a dream slowly drift away from them. The ship begins to move. Its engines breathe to life, deep and low, like the pulse of a sleeping creature. The ropes fall away from the pier, and the ocean opens before it. The Titanic leaves England behind, a floating city of dreams, carrying the rich, the poor, and everyone in between. Each person aboard carries their own small story, their own reason for crossing the Atlantic. Love, labor, adventure, hope. For some, this voyage is an escape. For others, it is a beginning. The decks above gleam with brass and crystal. The air smells faintly of salt and coal smoke. The sea stretches endlessly, calm and dark, as the ship glides toward an unseen horizon. Far below the shining decks of first class, below the marble staircases and the music of violins, lies another world. Quieter, humbler, yet filled with its own quiet rhythm of life. This is the world of the third-class passengers. Hundreds of men, women, and children, families, workers, dreamers, tucked away in narrow cabins deep within the ship's hull. They come from Ireland, from Sweden, from Italy and Syria, from small towns and cold farms, from villages with names that few aboard can pronounce. They do not speak the same language, yet they understand one another. They share something greater: the simple courage to begin again. The corridors are narrow, the air faintly warm with the scent of iron, sea salt, and soap. Somewhere down the hall, someone hums a tune. A baby cries, a suitcase is placed under a bunk, and a young man closes his eyes, thinking of the land he left behind. Life below deck is smaller, but it breathes with warmth. Evening deepens. The last light fades from the portholes, replaced by the gentle thrum of the ocean. Footsteps echo softly as passengers find their way to the dining saloon on F deck. It is not a grand hall, no chandeliers, no marble pillars, only painted walls, wooden tables, and the glow of electric bulbs, a quiet luxury in its own right. For many of these travelers, it is the first time they have dined under electric light. The first time they have sat at a table with proper cutlery, with spoons and forks made of cool, shining metal. The first time they have been served by a steward who calls them sir or madam. There is no music, only the low murmur of voices and the soft clatter of dishes. It is not opulent, but it is human, warm, ordinary, and deeply alive. No tuxedos, no violins. Only the sound of spoons against china and the quiet rustle of people finding comfort in routine. A woman with tired hands pours tea for her children. A group of young men share a loaf of bread and laugh in different accents. At the corner table, an old couple sits together in silence, their hands resting close but not touching. This world, hidden beneath the grandeur above, has its own beauty. A beauty of simplicity, of shared breath and shared purpose. Up on deck, the air is sharp and cool. The night has fully arrived. The sea is dark velvet, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. The stars seem close enough to touch, shimmering over the slow rhythm of the waves. But down below in that modest dining room, the world feels smaller, softer, safer. The ship sways gently, and with it, the glasses tremble. Someone laughs quietly, and another voice answers in a language half understood. There is no hurry, there is no fear, only the calm certainty that the ocean will carry them forward. Somewhere far above, first-class passengers are dining beneath crystal light, their meals served on porcelain trimmed in gold. But here, in the lower decks, the third-class passengers are content. Their plates hold stew and potatoes, bread and tea, and a sense of togetherness that needs no riches. A young girl looks around, wide-eyed. She has never seen so many people at once. To her, the dining saloon feels like a ballroom, the hum of voices like music, the flicker of the lamps like stars. She eats slowly, her spoon clinking softly against the bowl, her small hands warming around a cup of tea. Across from her, her father tells a quiet story in a dialect that no one else understands. But the smile on his face, the softness in his eyes, those need no translation. At another table, a man from Sweden nods to a family from Ireland, a simple gesture, a moment of shared respect. They do not know each other's names, they never will, but for these few days at sea they are neighbors. The ocean hums beneath the ship. Somewhere deep inside the hull, the engines beat like a slow heart. The sound is steady, comforting, a reminder that they are moving ever forward toward a future that feels vast and unknown. In the cabins, children sleep, rocked by the rhythm of the sea. The air smells faintly of soap and salt, of wool blankets and tea. Above them, the great ship breathes. Light shimmers through the corridors, slipping under doors and across quiet faces. It is a small miracle, this place. A steel world that floats, that shelters, that holds so many dreams in its hollow body. And yet, to those who walk its narrow halls, it feels alive. For many of the passengers, this is the first time in their lives that they have felt seen. In the world they left behind, they were invisible. Laborers, servants, miners, the forgotten and the poor. Here they are passengers. They have tickets, cabins, a seat at a table. Each meal, though plain, carries a strange sweetness, the quiet taste of dignity. To eat under soft light, to be called by name, to be treated with small kindness, it is enough. It is everything. They do not yet know that history will remember this ship for tragedy. For them, in this moment, it is only peace. Outside, the Atlantic stretches endlessly, dark and patient. The ship cuts through the water with effortless grace, leaving a silver path of foam behind. The moon hangs low, pale and distant. The sea and sky blend together like two halves of the same dream. If you listen closely, you might hear the distant hum of the engines, the faint rhythm of footsteps on deck, the whisper of water against steel. But beneath all of it there is quiet, a vast, almost sacred quiet, the kind that seems to exist only between worlds. And within that silence, the third-class dining saloon glows softly. A room of laughter, of soft talk, of simple meals and simple hopes, a world unseen but deeply human. For a moment, imagine you are there. Seated at one of those long wooden tables, you lift your spoon, feel the warmth of the stew, the gentle vibration of the ship beneath your feet. You glance around and meet the eyes of strangers who smile at you, shy but kind. The light flickers, the ship sways, and somewhere deep inside you a quiet thought forms that maybe even among strangers, even far from home, you are part of something larger. A shared voyage, a shared hope, a shared meal beneath the ocean's endless sky, and so the night drifts onward, calm and slow. The Titanic moves steadily westward, carrying with it not just the rich and the celebrated, but the forgotten and the hopeful. Those whose stories were written not in marble and gold, but in laughter, bread and tea. This is their world. A world of gentle light, soft voices, and the sound of spoons against china. A world that lived for a brief time in the quiet heart of a ship that dreamed of forever. A simple place filled with dignity. The ship moves steadily through the open water, its rhythm calm and certain. Far below the grand decks of light and laughter, another world rests quietly, small, ordered, and alive with its own steady heart. Here, on F deck, the air feels different. It is still and slightly warm, touched by the faint scent of wood and metal, of soap, and the deep hum of the engines beyond the walls. Along the corridor, lamps glow with a soft, golden hue. The light falls evenly, touching the painted panels and the edges of doorways with a tender calm. At the end of this passage lies the third-class dining saloon. It is neither grand nor showy. There are no marble pillars, no chandeliers, no velvet curtains gathered in folds. Yet the moment one steps inside, there is a sense of quiet order, of care in the details, of space made gentle for those who have known little gentleness. The floor is tiled in black and white, laid in clean lines that stretch evenly from wall to wall. The tables are of solid wood, polished smooth by many hands. The walls, painted in pale cream, reflect the light softly as if holding it in place. Above, electric bulbs shine from their fixtures, not harsh or glaring, but calm and steady. Their glow touches everything equally, leaving no corner in darkness. For many who entered this room, such light was a wonder in itself. In the towns and villages they had left behind, evening often meant the faint flicker of a candle, the small circle of light from a single oil lamp. Now, on this ship of iron and glass, the night could be held away by the simple turn of a switch. They looked up at those quiet lamps and felt something unfamiliar. Not awe, exactly, but a gentle reassurance. A feeling that the world, at least here, could be shaped by human hands, could be made steady and safe. It is said that the beauty of a place is not in what it possesses, but in what it offers to those within it. This dining saloon offered something rare, a sense of dignity. Not the grandeur of luxury, but the calm of being treated as someone who matters. The chairs were solid, the tables clean. Every setting was arranged with care, a cup, a spoon, a small plate, a folded napkin. There was order here, a kind of quiet respect, woven into the arrangement of things. For many of these travelers, such details held deep meaning. They had eaten in fields, in small kitchens, in boarding houses where plates were chipped and food was served without thought. They had carried meals to work in tin containers, eaten with rough fingers, washed in cold water after long days of labor. And now, aboard this ship, they sat at tables where stewards brought them food and tea. It was not expensive food, not rare or exotic, but it was served, It was offered with the same calm tone, the same manner, given without scorn or haste. Each gesture, each small act, whispered the same message: "You are welcome here." A woman from Ireland looked around the room and thought of her kitchen at home, where the ceiling had always leaked in the rain. A man from Sweden, still smelling faintly of the pine forests he had left behind, folded his hands before him, unsure if he should wait to be told when to begin eating. A family from Italy spoke softly to one another, their words a melody among the quiet sounds of dishes being set down. They did not know one another, yet the room gathered them into a single rhythm. The scrape of chairs, the murmur of voices, the soft clink of spoons against bowls, all of it blended into a sound that was calm and human, the sound of ordinary people being still. The electric light glowed across their faces, revealing expressions that were not joyful exactly nor solemn. Something gentler, a sense of contentment perhaps, the feeling of being part of something steady, even if only for the length of a meal. Above their heads, layers of steel and wood separated them from the grand dining rooms of first class, where crystal and silver caught the reflection of chandeliers. But the light here was enough. It did not need to dazzle to make them feel seen. They sat quietly, speaking little. Some smiled, some simply breathed in the unfamiliar comfort of warmth and order. For a few, this was the first time in years they had been served by another human being. Not as masters and servants, but as people sharing the same ocean, the same voyage. When the meal began, there was little ceremony. Stewards moved steadily down the rows, setting bowls and plates before each passenger. The soup was plain, but it steamed pleasantly, carrying the soft scent of vegetables and broth. Bread was passed along the tables, thick and warm. Cups of tea were filled and refilled, the air growing gentle with the faint aroma of leaves and heat. No one hurried. There was no orchestra, no glitter of cut glass, only the sound of many spoons stirring at once and the low murmur of satisfaction. It was in these moments, quiet, unremarkable, almost invisible, that the meaning of the place became clear. It was not built to impress, but to honor, to say without words that even those who could not afford luxury deserved space, light, and warmth. The tables, though plain, carried stories. A mother feeding her small child from her own bowl, smiling faintly as the child laughed. Two young men sitting side by side, comparing the calluses on their hands from years of work. An old woman who ate slowly, her eyes distant, as if watching the memory of another meal long ago. They did not know they were being remembered, that their quiet gestures would someday be part of history. To them, it was only supper, another night, another meal before the next sunrise. But beneath the surface of routine, something gentle took root, a shared humanity that needed no grandeur to exist. The design of the dining room, so simple, carried purpose. It did not overwhelm, it did not command attention, it allowed those within it to settle, to breathe. Every surface reflected a thought, that comfort could be built not from wealth, but from care. The white walls made the room appear larger than it was. The tiled floor, clean and patterned, gave order to space. The light touched the edges of the wooden chairs, the smooth surface of plates, the folds of sleeves as people lifted their cups. Everything felt measured, balanced, quiet. The kind of beauty that asks for no praise. If one were to stand at the doorway and look in, the scene would seem ordinary. A room full of travelers eating their evening meal, yet in the calm repetition of movement, spoon to bowl, bread to mouth, cup to lips. There was a rhythm like breathing, the rhythm of shared existence. Each person carried their own story, but in this space those stories rested side by side. The differences in language and custom softened. For a brief while they were not divided by where they came from or what they owned. They were simply passengers, human beings traveling through the same night, across the same endless sea. Later, when the meal ended, chairs were pushed back slowly. Some lingered, reluctant to leave the warmth of the room. Others stood quietly, gathering their coats, their scarves, their small belongings. The light continued to glow, calm and unwavering. The stewards moved through the room, clearing plates, straightening chairs, preparing for the next sitting. It was a small choreography, practiced and gentle. When the last group left, the dining saloon was empty again. The sound of the ocean filtered faintly through the walls, a low, endless murmur. The lamps flickered softly, reflecting against the tiled floor. The room seemed to breathe, holding the echo of voices, the trace of warmth left behind. It would be easy to pass by this place, to think of it as ordinary, unremarkable, a simple hall for meals. But for those who had walked far to reach it, who had left behind narrow homes and uncertain futures, it was more than a room. It was a moment of balance between hardship and hope. It offered them not luxury, but dignity, the quiet recognition that they too deserved light, a chair, and a place at the table. And perhaps that was the truest beauty the ship ever held. Not in its chandeliers or grand staircases, but here, in this modest space of wood and tile and warm electric light, a place that asked for nothing but presence, and gave, in return, a small reminder of what it means to be human. The feeling of being seen. The soft hum of the ship filled every corridor, steady and even, like a distant heartbeat. Somewhere above, the waves brushed against the hull in long, patient strokes. Down here, on the lower decks, life moved at a slower rhythm, measured, predictable, gentle. The third-class dining saloon glowed with warm light. The lamps, small and round, spread their calm over polished wood and whitewashed walls. It was evening. People drifted in quietly, their footsteps muffled against the tiled floor. Each person carried the marks of a long journey, worn shoes, heavy coats, and faces weathered by wind and work. Yet tonight, something felt different. There was a small, steady sense of order, of care in the air. They sat at tables, side by side, some shy, some curious, some unsure what to do with their hands. For many of them, this was the first time they had ever been seated at a real table, with real metal cutlery laid neatly before them. The knives caught the light in a gentle gleam. The spoons rested in quiet alignment, waiting to be used. It was a simple thing, but simplicity can carry great meaning. The chairs were sturdy, the plates smooth and clean, the napkins folded in white squares. Every small detail spoke softly of intention, of someone thinking, "You deserve this too." The stewards moved among them without hurry. Dressed neatly in dark uniforms, they spoke little, their gestures calm and practiced. They set down bowls of soup, small loaves of bread, and cups of tea, the steam rising slowly in the warm air. The passengers watched, still, almost uncertain. To be served, not to serve, was a new sensation for many. In their homes, meals were eaten standing or hunched over narrow tables. Food was taken quickly, out of habit and necessity, not ceremony. Here there was time to wait, time to breathe. Time to see that someone would bring the next thing without being asked. It was not grand service, not like the orchestras and silver trays above, but it was service nonetheless, and that made all the difference. A young man looked at the spoon in his hand as though it was something precious. He had worked years in a mine where the air was thick and the pay thin. Now he held polished steel, and though the soup was plain, it tasted clean and warm. A mother smiled faintly as her children giggled at the steam rising from their cups. They had never seen a steward before, never imagined a stranger would set food before them with care. For the first time, she could sit and eat without standing guard over the stove. At the far end of the room, an older man with grey hair bowed his head slightly before his meal. Not a prayer exactly, just a quiet pause, a moment to feel the strangeness of being treated kindly. In the soft murmur of conversation, there was something new, a kind of ease. The voices blended, Italian, Swedish, Irish, Polish, Arabic. Different tones, different cadences, all softened by the same warmth that filled the room. For once, no one laughed at the way another spoke. No one looked away from patched clothes or rough hands. They were all passengers here, travelers, not burdens, not workers or servants. There were no ranks between them, only the gentle closeness of shared tables. The sound of spoons stirring in cups became the evening's only music. Somewhere in that quiet, an understanding passed unspoken, that every person, no matter how small their means, holds a kind of worth that asks only to be recognized. The meal went on without rush, the ship moved smoothly through the Atlantic, and the lights swayed faintly with each roll of the water. The stewards continued their rounds, refilling cups, clearing plates, offering seconds where they could. It was not much, a simple meal on a long voyage, yet it carried weight beyond its ingredients. For the people seated here, it was a reminder of something easily forgotten: respect. To be given a place at a table, to be acknowledged with politeness, to be served a warm meal. These were not luxuries to them, but small signs that they mattered. They did not need to earn it by wealth or title. It was simply offered, as though the world had remembered them for a moment. One woman, her hair tied loosely under a scarf, looked around the room and whispered to her husband, "It feels proper, doesn't it?" He nodded, not finding words, but smiling faintly. Another passenger, a young man traveling alone, glanced across the room and caught the steward's eye. He hesitated, then gave a quiet nod of thanks. The steward nodded back, wordless, but with the smallest of smiles, the kind that exists between equals. These exchanges, brief and subtle, were enough. They did not need speeches or gestures. They carried a truth that could be felt more than seen. For those who had been overlooked for so long, ignored in crowded cities, or forgotten in the corners of farms, this simple recognition was a kind of awakening. It was the feeling of being seen. Above them, the music of the first-class orchestra might have been playing. Soft strings, a waltz carried through the decks. But down here, the sound that mattered was smaller. The slow scrape of spoons, the murmur of conversation, the creak of wood beneath steady feet. No one thought of the world above. They had no need to. This space, modest and plain, was enough. The ship's motion cradled them, the ocean rocking the great vessel with a rhythm as steady as breath. It felt as though time itself had slowed, as though the vastness of the sea had paused to let them rest. When they finished eating, no one hurried to leave. They sat for a while, their hands wrapped around cooling cups, speaking softly of families, of places left behind, of the faraway land they were sailing toward. The air was full of quiet hope. Not the bright, fierce kind, but the soft kind that settles gently in the chest. Later, when people would remember this voyage, some would speak of grand rooms and glittering lights, but others, the ones who sat here in this room of wood and tile, would remember the stillness, the warmth, the way the stewards smiled without judgment. One man would say years later, "On that ship, I felt like a person, not a piece of freight, not something carried, but someone traveling." And perhaps that was the most precious thing the Titanic ever offered. A brief, shining moment when even the poorest could feel equal, could feel visible. It was not the kind of beauty that could be photographed or written into lists. It was quieter, found in gestures too small to measure. The setting of a table, the serving of tea, the nod of respect from one person to another. It was the beauty of being acknowledged without fanfare, without condition. When the lights dimmed and the passengers began to leave, the room slowly emptied of sound. The stewards cleared the last dishes and the faint hum of the engines filled the space again. But the feeling lingered, the sense that for one evening, everyone there had been part of something shared, something almost sacred in its simplicity. They did not know the future that awaited them, nor the chapters of history their ship would write. All they knew was that tonight they had been seen. And in the quiet motion of the sea, that was enough. Morning on the Atlantic, breakfast in third class. Morning came softly to the Atlantic. Not suddenly, but like a slow breath, light seeped through the narrow portholes, pale and silver, brushing against the walls of the sleeping cabins. The ship moved with quiet certainty, its deep engines humming like a distant lullaby beneath the floor. Somewhere, far above, the waves rolled against the hull, a steady, endless rhythm, soft and low. In the third-class quarters, the world stirred awake. Footsteps began to echo along the corridors, soft at first, then more frequent. Doors opened with a faint creak, voices murmured, and the air filled with the gentle sound of people beginning another day at sea. The faintest aroma drifted through the narrow hallways, porridge, warm and familiar. It mingled with the salt of the ocean and the faint scent of soap and wood polish. For those who had spent nights in crowded ports or on hard floors, the smell alone felt like comfort. The stewards moved quietly between the tables, setting out tin kettles and heavy bowls. They worked without fuss, practiced and calm, their motions guided by habit rather than instruction. There were no announcements, no grand calls for breakfast, only the simple knowing that when the air smelled of oats and tea, the day had begun. The dining saloon, even in the early hour, held a gentle light. It came not from the sun, but from the soft glow of electric bulbs overhead, small, round, and steady. They made the air seem warmer, the walls less cold. A faint haze of steam rose from the kettles and bowls, curling in the air before fading into stillness. People entered in small groups, some carried children half asleep in their arms, others spoke little, their eyes heavy from a night of rocking seas. But as they settled into their places, a quiet sense of rhythm returned. The rhythm of life continuing, of routine forming even in the middle of an ocean. Breakfast, as always, was simple. Bowls of thick porridge, still steaming, slices of coarse bread, baked firm and rough around the edges, a small pat of margarine, pale yellow against the white plate, and cups of strong tea poured carefully and passed along the tables, Sometimes, when luck and supply allowed, there was a spoonful of marmalade. Golden, bright, and sweet, a rare bit of colour on an otherwise plain morning. For the children, it was a small joy. For the adults, a quiet indulgence. The tang of orange spread across the tongue, cutting through the salt and the steam, a reminder of sunlight and land. The sounds of breakfast were modest and calm. The scrape of spoons, the clink of metal against porcelain, the low murmur of voices. Occasionally, a child laughed, a bright, small sound that carried across the room like a ripple on still water. Most of the adults spoke in hushed tones, words softened by the shared understanding of morning. Some spoke of home, of small farms and narrow streets left behind. Others spoke of the future, of work to be found, of letters to be written once they reached America. A few said nothing at all, content to listen to the hum of the ship and the comfort of ordinary noise. The ship itself seemed to breathe with them. Every few seconds came the deep pulse of the engines, steady as a heartbeat. The motion of the sea was slow, and the faint roll of the vessel gave the air a rhythm that matched the quiet movements inside. Spoons lifted, cups tilted, heads bent forward, all in time with the ocean. There was no luxury here, no silver trays or fine china, but the meal carried a kind of peace. It was warm, filling, and predictable. In a world full of uncertainty, of distance, of language, of endless water, predictability was a gift. The porridge, though plain, carried the taste of nourishment. The bread, thick and uneven, filled the stomach and steadied the body. The tea, dark and bitter, woke the mind without rushing it. No one complained. No one expected more. They ate slowly, quietly, aware that this moment, this table, this food, was more than many had ever known. For the youngest among them, breakfast was an adventure. A chance to sit with strangers, to dip bread into warm milk, to taste something both foreign and familiar. A little boy giggled as his sister tried to stir her porridge, the spoon clinking against the bowl in irregular rhythm. Their mother smiled, a soft, tired smile, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea. For her, it was enough. A meal she didn't have to cook, food she didn't have to ration, a table she didn't have to clear. For once, she could sit, breathe, and let the morning exist as it was. Outside the portholes, the sea stretched endlessly in shades of blue and grey. The sky above it was pale and clean, the colour of new linen. Occasionally, sunlight broke through in gentle streaks, glimmering on the waves and sending brief flashes across the walls inside. The passengers would pause, just for a moment, to watch that faint shimmer, as if seeing daylight on the sea made everything feel a little more real. Somewhere above them, first-class passengers were beginning their own morning, with fine linens, polished silver, soft music. But here, none of that mattered. The simplicity of the lower deck had its own quiet beauty, not of excess, but of enoughness. A meal that warmed the body, a room that offered light, a ship that carried them forward, steady and strong. It was all they needed. As the meal went on, the conversation deepened slightly. One man spoke of his brother who had gone to New York a year before, working as a dockhand near the East River. Another mentioned the letters his cousin had sent from Boston. Stories of crowded streets and tall buildings, of wages and winters. The words were small, unremarkable, yet filled with the quiet weight of hope. A woman across the table nodded, though she understood little of the language being spoken. She smiled anyway. Sometimes a smile was enough to bridge everything that words could not. The children finished first, fidgeting in their seats, waiting for permission to run along the corridor. The parents let them go, listening as their footsteps faded into the hum of the ship. Then came the scraping of chairs, the folding of napkins, the soft thank yous whispered to the stewards. Slowly, the room emptied again, leaving only the scent of oats and tea and the faint warmth that lingered in the air. Outside, the ocean stretched to every horizon, a calm expanse touched by morning light. The ship cut through it quietly, leaving a thin white trail in its wake. For those standing near the small portholes, the sight of that endless water was both humbling and reassuring. There was no land in sight, and yet they were moving, carried towards something unseen but believed in. Back in the saloon, a steward gathered the empty bowls, stacking them neatly, the sound soft and rhythmic. He moved without rush, as if time itself were unhurried within these walls. The light flickered faintly as the ship tilted with the sea. Everything settled into stillness again. The quiet after breakfast had a peace of its own, not silence, but the kind of quiet that follows when people have been fed, when the body is satisfied, and the mind begins to wander gently into thought. The morning continued. Children's laughter returned, echoing faintly from down the corridor. The soft clatter of work began elsewhere on the ship. Boots on metal, brushes sweeping decks, voices calling out orders. Life resumed its rhythm, and somewhere deep within that rhythm, among the engines and the sea and the smell of tea, there remained the faint trace of something that felt almost like belonging. It wasn't loud, it wasn't grand, it was simply the feeling of being part of a moving world, a place that carried them all forward, together, across the quiet water. Breakfast was over, but the warmth of it lingered, in the memory of taste, in the calm of the body, in the steady hum of the ship beneath their feet. For another day, the sea would hold them gently, and the Titanic would continue her journey west, through light and mist and time itself, carrying not just people, but their quiet, enduring dreams. Midday meal, the heart of the day. Noon arrived quietly, as it always did at sea. There was no ringing bell or sudden call to announce the hour, only the slow turning of light. The morning brightness softened into a warmer tone that filtered through the ship's small windows. The hum of the engines deepened, steady and unhurried, blending with the faint rhythm of the waves outside. Far above, on the upper decks, the wind traced gentle patterns across polished railings. Down below, in the heart of the ship, the air carried a new scent, the unmistakable warmth of food being prepared. It was time for the midday meal, what the Edwardians called dinner. For the passengers in third class, this was the largest and most anticipated meal of the day, a pause in the long stretch of ocean hours. In the dining saloon, stewards moved calmly through the aisles, arranging plates and cutlery with practiced rhythm. The sound of metal touching wood was soft and steady, almost musical in its regularity. Soon the room began to fill. Footsteps, the shuffle of coats, the low murmur of voices. The air thickened with the scent of vegetable soup, simple yet comforting. Steam curled up from large serving pots, gathering in faint clouds before fading into the soft light. The soup was hot, its surface shimmering faintly. It smelled of carrots and onions, a touch of salt, a trace of pepper. Ingredients that spoke of home, of kitchens long left behind. As bowls were passed along the tables, spoons met porcelain in a quiet, even rhythm. Each motion seemed to settle the room, to draw everyone into a shared stillness. There was no rush, only the slow repetition of small human gestures: lift, taste, swallow, breathe. For a few minutes, conversation faded. The only sound was the sound of eating, gentle, regular, alive. Then came the next course: roast beef, sliced thick, or a stew, dense and steaming. The smell deepened, rich and earthy, filling the narrow space until it seemed to rest in every fold of clothing, every thread of the room. The stew was the heart of the meal, and in many ways the heart of third-class dining. It was not refined, but it was generous. Chunks of beef, potatoes cut into soft cubes, bits of carrot and onion simmered until they became one color, one flavor. It was food that asked for nothing more than to be eaten slowly. Each portion was served with boiled potatoes, plain, pale, filling. Sometimes there were a few spoonfuls of peas or turnips, their color faint in the muted light. Everything was hot, and that alone made it precious. No one spoke of taste, of seasoning, of presentation. They did not need to. The meal's purpose was simple: to feed, to warm, to keep the long journey moving. For the passengers, this hour carried a rhythm of its own. After the stillness of morning, the dining room became the ship's quiet center of life. People leaned closer to one another, sharing bowls, passing bread, exchanging small words in many different languages. Children sat between parents, their hands barely reaching the table. Old men ate slowly, their eyes distant but peaceful. The room was full yet calm. The sounds were layered. The scrape of a chair, the rustle of a sleeve, the sigh of someone tasting warmth after a morning of sea air. For those who had known hunger, the heaviness of a meal like this brought more than comfort. It brought steadiness, the sense that the world for a little while had enough to give. The light above the tables reflected softly on the polished wood. The electric bulbs, small and round, made the walls glow faintly. The air shimmered with steam and quiet movement. If one looked closely, each surface seemed to hold a trace of human warmth. A palm resting briefly on the table, a reflection in a cup, a wisp of breath in the cool air. A man from Ireland raised his bowl slightly before eating, a small gesture of habit from home. Beside him, a young woman from Sweden smiled faintly, though neither understood the other's words. Across the table, two brothers from Italy tore their bread and dipped it into the stew, nodding in quiet agreement at its heat. There were no introductions, yet they shared the same motion, the same meal, the same simple gratitude. The stewards continued their work with the same quiet discipline. They refilled cups with water or tea, cleared empty bowls, replaced them with clean plates. They spoke only when necessary, their voices low and even. To them, it was routine. To the passengers, it felt like care. The air changed slowly as the meal went on. At first, heavy with the scent of broth and meat, it lightened as plates emptied and conversation grew. Laughter appeared now and then, brief, unforced, carried easily on the hum of the ship. Someone hummed a tune under their breath, a simple melody that blended into the rhythm of spoons and footsteps. When the stewards brought the last of the bread, the passengers ate more slowly, aware that the meal was nearly done. There was no dessert, no fruit, no wine to mark the end, only the gradual quiet that came when hunger was eased. A few lingered, holding their cups, savouring the last of the tea. Others stood and left in pairs, moving toward the passageways and back to their small cabins. The room emptied as gently as it had filled. What remained was the echo of human presence, the faint warmth in the air, the smell of cooked food, the soft sheen on the tables. The stewards cleared away what was left, plates stacked neatly, spoons gathered, crumbs brushed into careful piles. They worked in silence, leaving the room exactly as they had found it, orderly, still, ready for the next sitting. Outside, the day continued without rush. The ocean spread in every direction, calm and wide, the light resting on its surface like silk. Through the ship's small windows, the sky looked distant but kind. The horizon was a thin, bright line, a promise that never drew closer but always led forward. Inside, those who had eaten sat quietly, their hands folded, their thoughts turned inward. The meal had filled their bodies, but also something quieter. The sense that they belonged to a moment that was shared, steady, and safe. For the rest of the day, the memory of that warmth would linger. The taste of salt and broth would cling faintly to their lips, the smell of stew to their coats. It was not luxury, not the kind that photographs would ever capture, but it was real. The midday meal was the still point between the hours of morning and evening, the small heart of the day. It gathered everyone, just for a little while, into the same light, the same air, the same human closeness. As the ship moved on, cutting gently through the grey waters of the Atlantic, the dining saloon grew quiet again. The hum of the engines returned as the only sound, deep and constant, the ship's unending pulse. Above and below, life continued, people working, resting, dreaming. But somewhere within the vastness of that vessel, a single room held the faint trace of shared warmth, the memory of soup and bread, of voices blending, of comfort found in something as small as a bowl of stew. It was, in every sense, the heart of the day. Supper and the slow quiet of night. Evening came softly over the Atlantic. It did not rush in, it drifted, slow and patient, like the sea itself. The light faded in gentle layers, thinning from gold to grey, from grey to blue, until the horizon dissolved into shadow. Above the waves, the great ship moved steadily, its lights flickering one by one against the growing dark. Down on F-deck, where the hum of the engines was deepest, the air grew cooler. The day's noise had quieted. Footsteps less hurried, voices lower, movements slower, as if the ship itself were preparing to rest. In the third-class dining saloon, the lamps glowed once more. Their light was soft and golden, bending gently against the white walls and wooden tables. The faint scent of bread and tea floated through the air, carried on a draught that came and went with the ship's slow breathing. It was time for supper, the last meal of the day. There was nothing grand about it. No clatter of silver trays, no shining glass or polished cutlery. But as the passengers began to arrive, the room filled with quiet warmth. The stewards, moving with their steady rhythm, laid out cold meats, cheese, bread, and pots of tea that steamed faintly in the lamplight. The food was plain: slices of ham, pieces of mild cheese, loaves of coarse bread cut thick. There was no dessert, no fruit, no wine. Yet, somehow, it felt complete. For those who had lived on less, even this modest meal was more than enough. It was not meant to impress, it was meant to comfort. To end the day not with indulgence, but with contentment. The room filled slowly, as people came in groups and pairs, greeting each other with small nods and smiles. Children sat with their parents, rubbing sleep from their eyes. Young men and women took their seats side by side, their voices soft with the tones of faraway places: Ireland, Italy, Sweden, Serbia, Syria. Each voice carried its own rhythm, its own story, yet all of them wove together into something whole. Words were not always understood, but gestures were. A piece of bread offered across the table, a nod of thanks, a shared smile at a child's laughter. These were their common language. Here, under the low light and the hum of the ship, they did not seem like strangers. They were simply people, travelers sharing the same water, the same air, the same fragile hope. The tea was strong and dark, poured into thick cups that held the heat for a long time. Steam rose gently, catching the glow of the lamps. People leaned over their cups, breathing in the warmth before drinking. The scent of it, faintly bitter, faintly sweet, mixed with the smell of bread and salt, of human presence and life. The sound of cutlery against plates came and went in an easy rhythm. There was no rush, no chatter, no pretense, just the quiet harmony of people sharing a meal. A young woman from Belfast hummed softly as she ate, an old tune she couldn't quite remember. Across from her, a man from Naples smiled at the melody, tapping his fingers on the table in time with it. Nearby, a father from Sweden broke his bread in half and handed it to a man beside him who spoke a language he did not know. The man nodded once, eyes soft with gratitude. No words were needed. Outside, the sea had turned to ink. The sky stretched endlessly, filled with quiet stars. Through the small round windows, faint traces of moonlight shimmered on the water. Brief silver ripples before the darkness closed again. Inside, the electric lamps gave the illusion of dawn in reverse, a small, human light against the vast night. Each one glowed like a held breath, delicate and constant. For many, this hour was their favorite. The work of the day was over. The air was still. The ocean seemed calm. There was nowhere to go, nothing to chase, only to sit, to eat, to exist. The hum of the engines beneath their feet was steady and reassuring, like the pulse of something enormous and alive. It reminded them that they were moving, even though they could not see it, that they were being carried somewhere through dark water toward a brighter morning. The meal went on quietly. There was laughter here and there, soft, brief, genuine. Children whispered to one another, hiding smiles behind their cups. A group of young men compared stories of the ports they had passed, gesturing more than they spoke. Old couples sat together in silence, the kind that comes from years of shared understanding. For a while, it felt as though time itself had paused, no past, no future, just the present, suspended between lamplight and sea. The room, though plain, had taken on a kind of radiance, not from decoration, but from presence. The warmth of bodies, the low hum of voices, the slow unfolding of companionship. It was not luxury, but it was belonging. As the last plates were cleared and the last cups of tea poured, the passengers lingered. Some sat quietly, hands folded, letting the warmth of the room hold them a little longer. Others drifted toward the corridor, speaking softly, reluctant to let go of the day. The stewards moved quietly among them, stacking dishes, wiping tables, restoring the order that would greet the next dawn. Their steps were unhurried, their faces calm. It was the same ritual repeated each night, yet it carried a weight beyond habit. The invisible work of care, of tending to lives in motion. When the lamps dimmed slightly, the room began to empty for the final time. The sound of footsteps faded, replaced by the deep, rhythmic voice of the ocean outside. In the silence that followed, the dining saloon seemed to breathe. The faint creak of wood, the whisper of metal, the sigh of cooling air. It was as if the room itself were resting. The warmth of supper still lingered. Not in the food, but in the memory of it, in the shared space it had created. Across languages, across distance, something had quietly connected them all. Not through words, not through grand gestures, but through the simple act of eating together, of being human together. The night deepened. The sea stretched endlessly, black and endless, yet calm. The ship moved forward, steady as ever, its lights small but unwavering against the vastness. Somewhere above, in the open air, the stars burned faintly over the cold Atlantic. Down here, under layers of steel and wood, people drifted towards sleep, full, quiet, at peace. And though they did not know what the next days would bring, they carried within them the soft certainty of this night, that for one brief, unremarkable hour they had been part of a small, floating world of warmth, of bread and tea, of laughter and light, of strangers who had ceased, for a little while, to be strangers. The rhythm of the sea and the service. The ocean moved with a slow, endless rhythm, and within that rhythm, life aboard the ship found its own quiet order. Far below the polished decks and grand staircases in the long corridors of F deck, the routine of the third-class passengers unfolded like the ticking of a clock, steady, patient, familiar. There were more than 700 souls traveling in third class. Men and women, children and infants, all bound for the same uncertain promise across the Atlantic. So many voices, so many faces, all contained within these few decks, a floating neighborhood made of iron and hope. To feed so many people in so small a space required rhythm, not luxury, not ceremony, but simple, practiced coordination. Each day, at mealtimes, that rhythm came alive. The dining saloon filled and emptied in waves. Groups entered one after another, like the tide itself. When one set of tables finished, another took their place. It was quiet and efficient, not rushed, but constant, like breathing. The stewards moved in lines, carrying trays of soup, plates of bread, kettles of tea. They spoke little, their faces calm, their movements guided by habit. Each table was cleared and reset in moments. Bowls gathered, crumbs brushed away, chairs straightened for the next to come. The passengers, too, learned the rhythm quickly. They came when called, took their seats, ate, spoke a little, and rose again. No lingering, no indulgence, just the calm necessity of being part of something larger than oneself. It was not luxury, but it was order, and that, in its own way, felt like respect. There were no menus, no choices to be made. No one asked what one preferred or requested a special dish. You ate what was placed before you, or you did not eat at all. And for most, that was enough. The food was warm, the plates clean, the service regular. Each meal came as promised, and for people who had known uncertainty and scarcity, that reliability was comfort in itself. A bowl of soup, given without question, a slice of bread, served without judgment. These things mattered more than variety. There was no alcohol, only tea or water. The tea was dark and strong, poured from heavy pots into thick cups that kept the heat well. The water was cool, clean, almost sweet in its simplicity. People drank in silence or with quiet conversation. grateful for the small rituals that broke the vastness of the journey. The meals did not last long, 15, maybe 20 minutes, no more. There were too many mouths to feed, too many waiting for their turn. But even in that brief time, something gentle passed between the tables. The low murmur of voices, the clink of cutlery, the sighs of satisfaction. It was a shared stillness, a moment of pause before the rhythm began again. Stewards collected the dishes. New passengers entered. The cycle continued, calm and endless like the motion of the sea outside. If one stood at the doorway, the sight would have seemed almost ceremonial. People moving in harmony without command, without chaos. Each person aware of the next, each action flowing into another. The dining room was not a place of extravagance, but of quiet efficiency, a living machine powered by human patience. For the passengers, this routine brought balance to the long days. When the world outside was nothing but horizon and sky, the predictability of meals became a kind of anchor. They knew when the bell would sound, when the tables would open, when tea would be poured. It gave shape to time, morning, midday, evening, in a place where the sea erased all boundaries. And though the meals were simple, few complained. There was gratitude in their restraint, a quiet understanding that this was better than what many had left behind. For some, the memory of hunger was still close, the thin bread of winter, the long hours of work without rest. Here, aboard the Titanic, they had warmth, food, and space enough to sit and eat in peace. When the meal was over, they rose slowly, careful not to disturb those who were still eating. They left in small groups, their footsteps soft against the tiled floor. The stewards nodded politely as they passed, then moved quickly to prepare for the next shift. The air filled again with the scent of broth and tea, the clatter of bowls, the steady hum of work. Outside the dining room, the corridors carried the sound of the ship's great engines, deep, rhythmic, constant. It was a sound that never ceased, a reminder that beneath their feet, metal turned and pistons moved, driving them through the endless water. That pulse was the heartbeat of the ship, and in time it seemed to blend with their own. At night, as they lay in their bunks, they could still feel it. The steady vibration through the walls and floor, a low murmur that wrapped around their dreams. It was not unpleasant. It was something to trust, something that said, "We are still moving. We are still safe." In their small cabins, the sounds of life continued. Children whispered until sleep claimed them. Mothers shushed the smallest ones, tucking them beneath rough wool blankets. Men talked softly of work, of home, of what waited beyond the sea. And through it all came that steady rhythm, the distant thrum of machinery, the sigh of the ocean, the faint creak of wood and metal. The ship seemed to breathe, its pulse joined to theirs. Some nights, someone would hum a song, barely audible above the hum of the engines. A tune from Ireland, perhaps, or from Italy, or a hymn remembered from a faraway church. The sound would drift through the corridors, carried by air and vibration, until it dissolved into the great mechanical heartbeat of the vessel. It was a strange harmony, human and machine, memory and motion, blending into something calm and endless. For all its order and structure, life in third class was not harsh. It was simple, yes, but not cruel. There was discipline without severity, routine without coldness. Everyone understood their place in the pattern. The time to eat, the time to rest, the time to wait. It was a balance between necessity and grace, and perhaps within that simplicity there was a quiet dignity, the sense that even the smallest life deserved rhythm, care, and light. When the last shift of the day ended, the dining saloon fell silent again. The lamps burned low, reflecting faintly off the white walls. The tables stood empty, clean and waiting. Outside, the Atlantic whispered against the hull. Inside, the heartbeat of the ship continued, deep, constant, and strangely tender. In their bunks, the passengers slept, rocked gently by the motion of the sea. Their dreams were quiet ones, of land, of work, of faces waiting somewhere far ahead. And beneath it all, the rhythm continued, the rhythm of service, of ocean, of life carried forward through the dark. It was the rhythm of the Titanic herself. Steady, human, and unbroken, the sound of hundreds of hearts moving together across the quiet, endless sea. A world within the ship. Beneath the polished decks and glittering chandeliers, far below the sound of music and footsteps, there existed another world. It was quieter, humbler, but full of life. Here, in the long corridors and softly lit rooms of third class, people from every corner of Europe gathered, hundreds of lives folded together within the walls of the same great ship. The third-class dining saloon was its heart. It was not grand, but it was alive with humanity. When the lamps glowed in the evening and the hum of the engines echoed through the floor, the room filled with the murmurs of many tongues. The sound of ordinary people, speaking softly, laughing gently, existing together between one world and another. If one stood quietly at the doorway, one could see the story of an entire continent written in faces. Mothers held their children close, feeding them carefully, brushing crumbs from their hair. Laborers, with calloused hands and tired eyes, ate slowly, grateful for the steadiness of a meal. Students sat beside them, young and unsure, their thoughts already drifting toward the cities they had dreamed of. Widows travelled with photographs folded in their pockets, small tokens of what had been left behind. And there were dreamers too, people who looked not backward but forward toward the idea of something better. Each had come from a different place, from the hills of Ireland, from the coasts of Italy, from the cold fields of Sweden, from the villages of Serbia, from the deserts of Syria. The air carried the mingling of many accents, many small fragments of song and story. It was the sound of difference made gentle by proximity, by the shared act of crossing the same sea. America. The word drifted from mouth to mouth like a soft refrain. It was a name that carried light, a word that meant work, possibility, safety, or simply beginning again. For some, it was a name they whispered like a prayer. For others, it was still only a rumor, a distant promise that seemed to shine just beyond the horizon. They spoke of it quietly over bread and tea. Some wondered about the cities they would see. Places with names that sounded large and bright: New York, Boston, Philadelphia. Others thought only of small things: a house with dry walls, shoes without holes, the scent of bread baking in a kitchen of their own. The talk was calm, unhurried, softened by the steady hum of the ship. The future was not a thing they debated. It was something they simply moved toward, like the ship itself, unseen but certain. In that dining room, surrounded by the deep sound of the Atlantic, they created a world of their own. It was not built from walls or rules, but from presence. The warmth of bodies sitting side by side, the quiet murmur of conversation, the faint rhythm of spoons against bowls. The air was thick with the ordinary beauty of life continuing. Children laughed at things too small to notice. Men spoke in low voices about work and weather, about where they had been and what they would do. Women exchanged glances of understanding, gestures that crossed the boundaries of language. Here, no one was rich or poor. Here, every person belonged to the same simple truth that they were traveling forward together through the night. The room itself seemed to hold them gently. Its white painted walls caught the light of the electric lamps, soft and even. The tables, plain but sturdy, were arranged in neat rows, each one marked by the presence of many hands. Hands that worked, that carried, that built. The smell of food lingered in the air. Bread, tea, the faint sweetness of stew, mingling with the scent of salt and metal that drifted from the sea. It was not the smell of luxury, but of sustenance, of life being quietly sustained. There were moments when laughter rose above the steady hum, brief and bright. A joke told in a language half understood, a child's giggle echoing against the walls, a song hummed under one's breath, carrying the melody of a faraway place. These were small things easily missed, but they gave the room its rhythm, a human pulse that matched the deep heartbeat of the ship itself. No one in that room thought of history. They did not imagine themselves as part of a story that others would one day tell. They were not symbols or figures or names to be remembered. They were simply alive, eating, talking, breathing, carried forward by water and faith, and perhaps that is why their world felt so complete. Because it asked for nothing beyond the present moment, because it existed entirely in the space between leaving and arriving, between what was lost and what might be found. There was a calm in that unknowing, the kind of peace that comes from surrender, to the motion of the sea, to the promise of morning, to the soft inevitability of time passing. A man from the Balkans, his clothes worn but neatly pressed, sat with his hands around a cup of tea. He listened to the voices around him, understanding few of the words, but recognizing their tone. Kindness, humor, weariness, hope. He nodded when someone looked his way, smiled when a child passed by. He was part of it, even without language. A young couple from Naples sat nearby, their heads close together, speaking softly. They shared one piece of bread, tearing it carefully into two. For them, America meant the chance to be married properly, to live without fear of hunger. At another table, a woman from Sweden watched her children eat, her expression calm and distant. She did not speak, but her eyes followed each of them, as though memorizing their faces in this strange, moving place. Each person carried a world inside them, and all those worlds sat together in this single room, bound by the steady rhythm of the ship's engines and the slow heartbeat of the sea. Outside, the Atlantic stretched endless and black, the surface touched now and then by the pale light of stars. Inside, the world of the third-class saloon glowed softly, a small island of warmth adrift in the vast dark. The hum of the ship rose through the floor, a sound that never stopped, deep and certain. The plates were cleared, the tables wiped clean, and still the room seemed to hold a quiet afterglow. The warmth of breath, the trace of voices, the memory of laughter. It was a fragile world, yet full. Contained within steel and light, it carried the essence of something timeless. The will to move forward, the need to belong, the quiet courage of ordinary lives. They did not know that they were part of history. They did not know that years later others would speak their names with reverence or sorrow. All they knew was this: that they were together, that they were alive, and that somewhere beyond the dark horizon, a new world waited, waiting to begin. And so they ate, they spoke, they rested. They trusted the rhythm of the ship and the sea. And in that trust, in that togetherness, a small, self-contained universe was born. A world within the ship, quiet, human, and whole. The Last Supper and the echo beneath the waves. Night settled slowly over the Atlantic. The light faded into a quiet blue, and the air above the sea grew still. The great ship moved steadily westward, its lights glowing against the horizon like a constellation made by human hands. Inside, life continued as it always had, calm, ordered, full of small sounds and quiet motions. On the night of April 14th, 1912, the people of third class gathered once more in their dining saloon. It was an ordinary evening, and that was its grace. There was no sense of history, no whisper of what was to come. Only the familiar rhythm of meal and conversation, the warmth of bodies, the hum of the ship beneath their feet. The lamps glowed softly above the tables, their light catching on the pale walls, on the wooden chairs worn smooth by use. The air was mild and faintly fragrant, a blend of soup, bread, and the faint trace of salt from the ocean that always found its way through the vents. It was the scent of routine, of normalcy, of another day that had safely passed. The meal that night was simple, like all the others. Bowls of soup, thin but hot, were set upon the tables. There were potatoes, steamed and plain, and stew, thick, hearty, familiar. No dessert, no wine, no ceremony. Just food to warm, tired travelers as the ocean stretched endlessly around them. People talked softly as they ate. Children laughed, some sang under their breath, others spoke of the journey's end, of how many more days remained before they would see land again. The air was full of the same gentle togetherness that had filled every mealtime since the ship left Southampton. No one knew it would be their last. For them, it was only Sunday night. Another supper, another moment of comfort in the middle of the sea. The ship's motion was calm, almost still. Through the small portholes, one could see the faint shimmer of starlight on the water. Thousands of tiny reflections dancing with the waves. It was a clear night, and the sky above was vast and full of stars, brighter than any seen on land. Inside, the electric lamps gave off their steady glow, soft and golden, the color of warmth. In the dining saloon, laughter rippled here and there, low and sincere. Someone told a story, someone else translated it, half understood but fully felt. A steward poured tea into chipped cups, careful not to spill, smiling as he moved between tables. There was no hurry, no fear, only the quiet satisfaction of being together, safe and fed. Later, as the meal ended, the room emptied gradually. Chairs were pushed back, plates stacked, children gathered into tired arms. The hum of conversation faded into the sound of footsteps in the corridor. The stewards moved quietly through the room, wiping the tables, sweeping the floor, setting everything in its place for morning. The lamps burned low. The air still carried the warmth of many breaths, the faint aroma of soup and bread. When the last steward turned out the lights, the room rested in darkness, calm, complete, at peace. Outside, the ship continued westward, steady and sure. Then came midnight, and the world changed. Above, on the open deck, the air was sharp and cold. The ocean stretched smooth and silent under the stars. And then a sound. Not loud, not violent. Just a long, low scrape. The ship shuddered gently, like a creature disturbed in sleep. Dishes rattled faintly in the cupboards. Somewhere, far below, water began to whisper through metal. In the dining saloon, the lights flickered once, then steadied. The room, still and empty, seemed to listen. A few minutes later, the lights trembled again, this time longer, like a breath being held. The passengers, waking in their cabins, felt the faint jolt, but thought little of it. Some opened doors and peered down the corridors. A few laughed softly, assuming the ship had struck a wave. Others went back to bed, trusting the solid calm of the great vessel that had carried them so far. But in the quiet spaces below, the sound of water grew. Slow at first, then steady, then sure. The heartbeat of the ship changed its rhythm. The dining saloon stood silent, waiting. The chairs that had held families, the tables that had gathered laughter, remained exactly as they had been left. Still, orderly, expectant. For a while, the lights continued to glow. Then, one by one, they began to dim. As the hours passed, the calm of the sea became deceptive. The stars above burned bright, indifferent and endless. Inside, voices rose, footsteps quickened, the air filled with motion and confusion. But down here, in this simple room of wood and light, time seemed to pause. The water crept in quietly, without malice, without haste. It touched the floorboards first, cold against the warmth left by human life. Then it rose, inch by inch, until it reached the edges of the tables, the legs of the chairs, the lamps on the walls. The reflections of those lamps shimmered briefly across the water's surface, then vanished as the current swallowed them whole. The room that had been full of light and laughter became a shadow of itself. A place of silence, of stillness, of memory. But what it had held could not be undone. The warmth of voices, the hum of shared humanity, the quiet dignity of people who had once sat together in hope. Those things did not fade with the light. They lingered, soft and invisible, in the cold water and the air that still moved through the corridors. Some said that when the ship went down, it carried not just its passengers, but every word spoken, every breath taken, every sound of life that had ever filled its rooms. And perhaps that is true. Perhaps beneath the dark weight of the Atlantic, that dining saloon remains. Not as wood and metal, but as an echo. A memory suspended in stillness. If one could listen closely enough, perhaps they might hear it. The faint clatter of spoons, the murmur of distant conversation, the light laughter of a child, a mother's voice, soft and calm. These are the sounds that do not vanish. They drift through the water like threads of light, like small fragments of warmth preserved against the cold. The third-class dining room was never a place of grandeur, but it was a place of humanity. Here, people who had little found comfort in one another. Here, the poor were treated with care, the weary were given rest, and strangers found the courage to dream together. It was not the chandeliers or the music above that defined the Titanic's soul. It was this, the quiet kindness of ordinary people sharing bread and tea at the edge of the world. Now, more than a century later, the ship sleeps beneath the sea. The walls that once echoed with laughter are covered in silt and silence. The chairs are gone, the dishes lie scattered across the ocean floor. But the memory remains. Clear, gentle, undisturbed. The sea in its vastness keeps it. It holds the warmth of that room, the small lights that once shone in the dark, the voices that once spoke of tomorrow. Somewhere in that endless deep, where time no longer moves, there may still be a trace of that final supper. A shimmer of light, a note of laughter, a memory of belonging. The Titanic was a marvel of its age, but its greatness was not only in steel or design. It was in the people it carried, the mothers, the labourers, the dreamers. Those who sat together at a simple table and believed that a better life waited just beyond the horizon. The ship may rest in darkness now, but the kindness it once held, the dignity, the warmth, the humanity, still shines, unseen beneath the waves. And if the sea has a memory, perhaps it remembers this most of all, not the noise of disaster, but the quiet hum of togetherness, the rhythm of spoons against bowls, the sound of people who were, for a brief and beautiful moment, alive and together. Closing reflection. History remembers the upper decks. It remembers the glitter of glass, the sound of violins, the glow of chandeliers reflected on polished marble. It tells of fine dinners and elegant gowns, of laughter carried over wine and light. But far below, in the quieter places of the ship, another story unfolded, a smaller story perhaps, but no less human. In that plain dining saloon on the lower deck, men and women from distant lands gathered around wooden tables. They ate, they spoke softly, they smiled at one another in languages they did not always share. There were no grand speeches, no music drifting through the air, only the gentle rhythm of spoons against bowls, the rustle of sleeves, the warmth of breath in a room filled with light. They did not think of themselves as part of history. They were only living, working, hoping, traveling towards something better. And yet, in their quietness, they carried the truest part of the story, not the luxury but the humanity, not the wealth but the will to endure. Each person in that simple room held a small, steady flame of hope, for safety, for belonging, for the promise of a new beginning. Time has taken the ship, and the sea keeps its secrets. The walls that once heard laughter now rest in silence, deep beneath the waves. But the memory of that place where the warmth, the togetherness, the dignity still drifts softly through the water, untouched by years. Perhaps the ocean remembers, perhaps in the stillness below, a faint echo remains. The murmur of conversation, the sound of a child's laughter, the quiet clatter of dishes. A reminder that even in the most ordinary moments, something gentle and eternal can be found. As you rest now, imagine that quiet world beneath the sea. The lamps are glowing softly. The air is filled with the hush of voices and the steady heartbeat of the ship. The people are there, mothers, labourers, dreamers, gathered once more in the light, as if time has chosen not to move. Let the rhythm of the ocean cradle you. Let it remind you that kindness endures, that even in the darkest depths, humanity continues to shine. For the story of the Titanic is not only one of loss, it is also one of connection, of courage, of lives that met for a brief moment in time and became part of something vast and everlasting. And so as the sea breathes and the night drifts on, remember them. Remember the light that once glowed in that quiet room, and know that somewhere, In the heart of the deep, it still glows softly forever. Good night.